so due to some technical difficulties, our first interview got cut off. So here we are, hours later with the sun gone down, and this is our second attempt. So hopefully you enjoy. Yeah, when we left off before, you guys were just talking about the importance of really getting to the bottom of things in your relationship and just discussing conflict and not being afraid of it, and also almost even learning to just expect that that is the norm for your relationship. And I think that's something that I really admire about your guys' relationship, because I think it's unique in the way that your dating relationship was so difficult that everyone would always tell you, oh my goodness, marriage is going to be so hard, and then you guys were kind of scared almost, because you're like, oh my goodness, if it's harder than this, like, how are we ever going to survive? And then once you got married, it was almost like, oh, like this is so much nicer, like when is the second shoe going to finally drop and this going to get really bad because everyone warned us about this.
Yeah. Funny story kind of related to that. I was just thinking about when we were doing our marriage mentoring, the pastor who married us did like this kind of quiz thing. Basically, like, we had to answer it separately, and it covered a whole bunch of different things, from finances to our relationship, and then he kind of like, reviews the results and then talks them over with us. And when he met with us and he was going over the results with us, he was like, usually in a dating relationship, like, one of the things I notice in this test is that people typically have rose-colored glasses on, like the way that they view each other, the way that they view what marriage is going to be like, how they're going to deal with problems, etc. And he's like, but you guys, you've taken off the rose-colored glasses and you've thrown them on the floor and you've stomped on them. And it was like, kind of like, a bit of a sobering moment, or like this realization of like, okay, this has been really hard. This has been a challenging relationship. But I think even for our pastor, he almost, I don't know, I think it was an encouraging thing in the sense that he, I think he spun it in a way that it was encouraging, that like we
already knew, like, oh, we see finances very differently. That's going to be hard in marriage.
Yeah.
Oh, we argue about this stuff. That's going to be hard in marriage. Or here's some of the struggles that we've had in dating. Like, those are going to be even harder in marriage. So we kind of already, I don't know, like you said, we've been through some messy stuff already. And there's a sense where sometimes, in some ways, dating is the right time to do that.
Yeah, and I think there's a sense where we all want or expect maybe the dating experience that is like all, peachy and like, you're wearing rose-colored glasses, everything is beautiful and it's always great, and it's like butterflies and rainbows and chemistry and all that stuff. And if people have had that experience, like, I'm not saying that's a negative, and if you have that experience, then you're doomed too. But I think in our experience, if you're not having that, that's okay too. And like, we actually gained so much value and even just growth within our relationship because it was hard and we were forced to go work through some things early on. But
Yeah, I think that just affirms like the importance, or just like even maybe the encouragement or challenge to people to actually go there, right? Knowing that it will significantly bless and improve your marriage, right? If it goes that way. So another question that I had, just from even earlier on in the interview, is just about boundaries. I think this is such a common topic that comes up when people are talking about dating, it's like, okay, and then like, what kind of boundaries do we need? And or like, so often you set boundaries and then they get broken, and it's like, okay, well, how do we set sustainable boundaries? What does that look like? So yeah, just curious what your take on boundaries is.
Yeah, I feel like it's always tough when you're on the other side of things. Like now that we're married, it's easy to say things, but when you're dating, we all have that. Like other people, when they're going through something and you're done, like when you're done school, you're like, oh, it goes by like that. But when you're in it, it does not feel like that. But anyway, all that to say, like, I personally, my encouragement or challenge would be, in terms of like physical boundaries, I think that's mostly what this is referring to. I would almost encourage a challenge as strict as possible. I just think that.
What do you mean by that, as strict as possible?
Like, in some ways, like, do as little physically as possible, almost. Like, you know, still hug and hold hands or whatever, or like, show the other person you care for them. But if you can avoid kissing, making out, like, other things that even more further along, closer to sex, the better, because those things are just, they're distracting. Like, you're already in dating, I feel like you already have those rose-colored glasses on, generally. You already have a hard time remembering what's important and like where you should be going, and that stuff's distracting. And the other thing is, like, you have your whole marriage to be physical with each other. And I feel like there's other elements too of like, even what you were saying about, like, is it really loving all the time being physical, right? With each other. And what are you really going after? Remember that? What you were saying before about that?
No, really.
Okay. I just, yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like with with physical stuff, if you're really questioning yourself, like, why am I being physical? Why do I want to push these boundaries, go over these boundaries? A lot of times it's, in dating, it's quite selfish. It's not usually coming out of this place of like, I really want to help this person see Jesus more, and that's why I want to make out with him on the bed or something. And ultimately, like, we broke boundaries that we made, and we made new ones and all that stuff, and it is hard, and it's like I said, it's easier when you're married to say all this stuff. And there's grace for all of that. Like, if you've broken a boundary with your boyfriend or girlfriend, or you struggle with that, like, I mostly want you to know that Jesus still loves you, and that's okay. And even in that messiness, you can talk about that. You can work through that, and there's grace for it. Yeah. So I don't know if that's really helpful. I mean, the other thing we talked about too is even how boundaries, like, in and of themselves, really aren't the answer either, right? Because it's deeper. It's deeper than just, okay, we're only going to hold hands in public or whatever. I don't even.
Well, I think boundaries, like, they're not the solution, right?
Yeah.
You have to remember, like, you know, you're saying being as strict as possible, which, and I think that's important in the sense of, like, it can be distracting, but being as strict as possible and holding all these boundaries and saving yourself for marriage, actually, like, that doesn't mean you guys are safe from sin or safe from, like, you're avoiding problems or something. Like, the problem is actually your heart, and the boundary is just, yeah, like, you know, everyone knows what Jesus has said about sin and our hearts, right? Even if you have anger towards someone in your heart, it's like you've committed murder. If you lust after someone, you're an adulterer. So it's the same thing with boundaries. Just because you haven't had sex before marriage, you have to, and that's what you have to go after. So when you're setting your boundaries, if you are, or you're working through that, like, don't just focus on the external, the things that you want to avoid. Focus on the heart. Why? Like, why are we doing this? Why? Okay, we didn't feel great about what just happened there, or the other day, or whatever. And what was going on? Like, what were we going after? in our hearts in that moment. I don't know if that makes sense. I know that's can be a big question or a big concept, but it's yeah, I guess that would be my encouragement with boundaries, is the continual questioning of like yourself and each other, of what are our intentions. And I think maybe what you were getting at is, it's like there's a sense where marriage is where God intended like the fullness of our intimacy to be like enjoyed and displayed, right? And so of course we have intimacy and all of that in other relationships, but when you're not married, it's like and especially in a dating relationship, it's like that's not the foundation, where like it doesn't have the same foundation. It's not meant to hold that aspect of a relationship. And so I'm kind of rambling here.
No, but I was even thinking about how, like, I feel a little bit like, even when I was saying be as strict as possible, part of it is, though, I feel like when you're dating, this may be just how I felt, you feel a little bit like, well, are we missing out? Like, or, like, if we don't kiss enough, what if on our wedding day, our kiss doesn't look good? Or what if, you know, even like non-believers, especially, an argument would be, you gotta have sex before marriage, or else what if you don't like know if you're compatible, or if that goes well, or whatever. And in my head, or my encouragement is that, like, you don't need to worry about that, because if that's all backwards, like, once you, like, in some ways you're free to have as strict as boundaries as possible, because once you're married, you can enjoy all that stuff, and that's the place where you then have this foundation of a promise of, look, we're in this together forever, and so now let's have sex, let's kiss, and if it's bad or if it's weird, we can work through it, and that's it. We're not trying to prove something in this. And like I said, it's easy to say once you're married, and ultimately, like you were saying, babe, it's not really about the boundaries, it's more about your heart. If dating and marriage is about pointing someone else to Jesus, about being a picture of Jesus and his love for us, like, if that's ultimately the purpose of it, then it doesn't really make any sense to date someone that isn't going to point you towards Jesus at all. Like I said, it's really easy to say, and if any of you are in a relationship with an unbeliever, or working through that, or that's tricky, and I don't exactly know how to go about that. And the Bible does talk about, like, couples that are in relationships and one person's not a believer for whatever reason, whether maybe two people were dating and one person became a believer partway through, and they're already living together or something. Like, there's a sense where the Bible says, like, don't break off a marriage just because your spouse is unbelieving. Like, try to win them over in love. And so, I don't want to be too, like, cold cut, harsh, like, you know. But if the person is considering dating someone, right, and they check all the boxes except for they're not a Christian, I don't know, I think, going back to your list, like, what do you really want in a person? And ultimately, what you really want is Jesus.
And I think not even just what you really want, but it's also just being really honest with yourself, and I think even asking those questions, like, what are you afraid of, or what do you feel like you need? I think you said this before. What do you feel like will make you happy or satisfy you? Or what if you didn't have, like, if you didn't ever get married or something, do you feel like you would have a full life still? And just, I don't know, almost like taking off those rose-colored glasses as much as you can, and maybe taking an honest look at yourself.
Because I like, ultimately, what we all want and what we all need and what we're all longing for is more of Jesus. Like, he's what we're made for. But we look for him in all sorts of different things, right? We look for him in careers, we look for him in relationships and everything else. And so, if someone is you know, potentially pursuing someone that isn't a believer, there's a sense where that'd be one indication to me of like, oh, you're looking to satisfy your heart with someone else other than Jesus. Because if you were still like looking after Jesus, you'd want someone else to remind you that. Like, it's already hard enough in this world to remember that what we want is Jesus, and that He loves us, and that we're okay, and we're secure, and our identity's in Him. It's already hard enough. You have to surround yourself with a community and friends that do that. And so, if you're about to partner and become like best friends and with someone that's not going to remind you of that, that's really tough. So yeah, we have friends that are married, that are dated, and that have been in these relationships, and it is tough. And I want to go into those conversations with a lot of grace and try to understand more. But yeah, like I think, like you said, it's an opportunity. Almost take a look down. Like, why would I even consider this person? Like, what do I really think will satisfy me? What am I really chasing after? It's almost a chance to like see your idols and then take that all the way. Will that satisfy? Ultimately, I don't believe it will. Like, I believe Jesus is the only one that can satisfy our heart's longings.
Cool. Well, thanks so much.